You know, life is tough. It can make you want to cry. I'll tell you, it does more than that. It makes you cry. Occasionally, you just have to shed a tear. No matter how tough you are, you shed a tear. But it'll also make you laugh occasionally. Life's weird. Occasionally, you can't help it. You just have to laugh. Sometimes you laugh at other people's calamity, which isn't really a good thing, but you'll do that. Charles Shoals, the famous peanut guy, said, "Sometimes I lie awake at night and I ask, where have I gone wrong? And then a voice will come to me saying, this is going to take more than one night." Berman wrote this. I thought this was really good. He said, life is like photography. You use the negative to develop. Now, I'm going to talk about a president, but I'm not going to name him, and he's a former president, but once upon a time he was president. I'm trying not to be political, you know what I mean? Former president was visiting a primary school class, and there was a discussion in the class about words and their meanings. And so the teacher asked the president if he would to lead the discussion. And so the word that they were looking at that moment was the word tragedy. And so the president was asked to take over, and so he turned to the kids and he asked for an example of a tragedy. A little boy raised his hand and he said, okay. And he said, well, if my best friend who lives on a farm is playing in the field and a runaway tractor comes along and knocks him dead, well, that would be a tragedy. And the president said, no, that's a good example, but no, that would be an accident. And so a little girl, a little surprised at that answer, the little girl said, well, if a school bus carrying 50 children drove over a cliff, killing everyone inside, that would be a tragedy. And the president said, well, that's a good try, but I'm afraid not. That's what we call a great loss. So the room went silent. They're like, what is he looking for? What is the answer to this? And so he looks around the room, everybody just sitting there real quiet, and he says, well, isn't there someone here who can give me an example of a tragedy? Little Johnny in the back finally raised his hand. He said, well, if Air Force One carrying you was struck with a missile and blown to smithereens, that would be a tragedy. And he said, fantastic, that's right. And can you tell me why that would be a tragedy? The little boy scratched his head and said, well, because it sure wouldn't be a great loss, and it probably wouldn't be an accident either. I think we spend a lot of our time focusing on accidents and loss and tragedy, and we somehow in our mind want to hold God accountable for all of it. If you're not careful, that can consume you. I want to look at 4 truths quickly in the book of Job that I believe will help you figure out at least some of the reasons that good people suffer. Good people suffer from injustice. The very first verse of the book of Job, if you're there, I don't know what page number it's on, you're going to have to look in the index. But the very first verse says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright and one who feared God and shunned evil. The point of that verse is Job did not deserve what was fixing to happen to him. Now, if you drop down verse 13 through about verse 19, thereabouts, you'll find that things began to go wrong. His sons and daughters were eating together, and then one messenger after another come. The Sabaeans raided them and took them away, and indeed they killed all the servants, that is, the donkeys. And then he starts talking about the sheep, how the sheep were hit by lightning and all the servants there were killed in this act of lightning. And then it says in verse 17 that the Chaldeans came in 3 bands, and they raided all your camels, and they took all of them and killed all your servants. So each time he lost everything he had, and all of his servants were killed, but one who managed to live through it and came back to tell Job what had happened. He lost everything in a moment, but then he got hit with the biggest thing. Verse 19, it says, it was this great wind came and hit the 4 corners of the house where your 10 wonderful children were celebrating together. So they were obviously, many of them were grown, if not all of them grown. And the wind struck the 4 corners of the house, and it collapsed and killed everyone inside, your children and your servants. And he said, I'm the only one that survived, and I've come to tell you. Here's what you need to get. Verse 22 of Job chapter 1. In all this, Job did not sin, and there's the part, nor charge God with wrong. Now, Job was innocent. He deserved none of this. But he did not charge it to God as if he had done him wrong. You know, the world is filled with stories of injustice, of injuries that come upon people because the world is unjust. There's injustice everywhere, especially, quite honestly, for the innocent, because if you're not innocent, then I guess it's just, right? But if you're innocent, and I'd have to say all these people were innocent of this, they did not deserve any of these things. You know, you could talk about innocent U.S. civilians shot and killed recently by police. You could talk about innocent police shot and killed by a sniper. You could talk about innocent business people, 3,000 around that number, killed on September the 1st by a terrorist, 2001. You could talk about innocent bystanders who are from time to time killed in our country by drive-by gang shootings. They didn't do anything, just standing at the wrong place. Or people that have been killed or maimed by bombs that just happened to be in a race in Boston. Or innocent shoppers, like on July the 3rd, just a few days ago. The ISIS suicide truck, many of you didn't even hear about it, probably, hit in Baghdad. Over 500 casualties. Barely got a blip on our newscast. 292 are dead now, but the death toll was rising. As of Thursday, July the 7th, 200 were injured beyond the ones that were dead. 292. I know you probably heard about how on Thursday the innocent were celebrating in a place, who would have thought? Nice. That's not the way they pronounce it, but nice. That's the way we say it. France. 85 are dead already from that truck that rolled through. People just celebrating country's holiday. 52 are still in critical condition. 25 of those 52 are on life support and not necessarily expected to live. So the numbers may hit over 100. Innocent people. Innocent war casualties. We could talk about them all day long. All those killed in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan. There are approximately 210,000 civilians who have been killed as a result by violent activities during the course of those wars that weren't engaged in the war. 210,000 not engaged. Or we could talk about innocent war refugees. According to Geneva, the UNHCR, on June the 18th, they came out with a report that said in 2014, the number of refugees in the world had reached the most it had ever reached in the history of the world, 59.5 million people displaced. That number has now reached over 60 million people in the world today do not have a home. They are running from a war right now. Innocent people. So in our Job training, we search for answers, and one of the reasons that good people suffer is injustice. The second truth is good people suffer from illness. Not just injury from injustice, but illnesses come. It's hard to know how to explain all this. If you go to Job chapter 2 and look at verse 7, so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. He couldn't even walk. The sole of his foot to the crown of his head. If you go on reading, verse 9 says, then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. Just let it go. Die. Die already. Now you think she's wrong, and she is wrong. But when you love somebody and you see them suffering, you can almost wish that they'd just go on. So don't pick on her too hard. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? That was God's reply. Don't talk foolish. In Job chapter 3 and verse 1, though, Job cursed the day of his birth. I wish that day had never occurred. I wish I'd never been born. You ever felt that way? In Job 3 and verse 11 it says, why did I not die at birth? Why couldn't I have been just a miscarriage? Did you ever wish that? That you'd never really existed? Your pain been that bad? Now, I like the reading we had a moment ago. I want to read it from the King James Version because not the New King James, but the King James Version says something that I'd never noticed before. In Job 3, verse 26, if you've got the King James, you'll see it. It says, it puts it in the past, not in the present, which is difficult in the Hebrew, but I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came. What he's saying, if I understand him correctly, he's saying, everything wasn't going perfect in my life before this happened, folks. You think my life was just sweet, and I had no trouble, and then bang, this happened, and bang, that happened, and bang, that happened, and bang, that happened, and you think that's the way my life was. He said, my life was tough, just like yours. And then bang, 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 bang. Puts it in a different realm, doesn't it? Illness. You know, the world is filled with stories of illnesses. There are deadly consequences to so many kinds of illnesses here. Let's just talk about cancer a minute. I know you don't want to talk about cancer. You don't want to think about it. I don't either. But between 2003 and 2007, 5 years in America, these are the statistics for just 5 years. Lung and bronchial cancer, 792,495 people died in America alone. Colon and rectal cancer, 268,783 died in those 5 years. Breast cancer, 206,983 died. Pancreatic cancer, 162,878 lives. Prostate cancer, 144,926. Leukemia, 108,740. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, 104,407. Liver and I'm not even sure I can say this word, intrahepatic bile duct cancer, 79,773. Ovarian cancer, 73,638. Esophageal cancer, 66,659. Now that's just cancer, and those are just about 10 kinds in 5 years. But it's worse than that. Those aren't the worst diseases. AIDS, Ebola, rabies, ALS, Alzheimer's. Probably one of the worst to me is called fatal familial insomnia. Probably never heard of it. You suffer and you cannot sleep, and you know your brain is dying. Diabetes, cholera, malaria. In our Job training, why do good people suffer? It doesn't give me any peace, but I have to tell you one of the reasons good people suffer is illness. Good people suffer also from insults. Good people, just doing good things, hurt inside. See, one of the main ways we suffer, we talk about these external sickness and injuries, but there's some suffering that takes place inside that's almost worse than having your leg cut off. Do you understand what I mean? There's some suffering that goes on within. In Job 16, verses 1 and 2, and Job answered and said, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. They had come, and at first they were showing him so much compassion, but after a little while they began to insult him. Verse 7, and so it was after the Lord had spoken these words to Job. This is Job 42. That the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my wrath is aroused against you and your two friends, for you have not spoken to me what is right as my servant Job. You've been insulting him. He did not deserve this, and you've been more than that. You've been insulting me like you thought you knew what I would do. He says, I am not doing this to Job, and you're blaming me for it. Verse 8 says, now therefore take for yourself 7 bullocks and 7 rams. This is Job 42. And go to my servant Job and offer for yourself a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept him, lest I deal with you according to your folly, because you have not spoken to me what is right. You have hurt him, and you said bad things about me, and you've done harm through your insults. You know, the world is filled with stories of insults that have psychologically traumatized people. Oh, there's so many. Well, we can talk about children. Let me tell you about children. We could talk about how they have lived through being rejected, left on a corner, ignored. We can talk about how they've been terrorized or isolated, put in a closet, or corrupting their morals, or exploiting them. Children, little ones. Or we could talk about adults and how they've been hurt psychologically. Adults have been humiliated, put down, made fun of in front of others. Sometimes this is a wife, sometimes it's a husband, sometimes it's an elderly person. Adults have been demeaned or disregarded for their thoughts, their ideas, their needs. They've been teased, they've been treated sarcastically, put down, made to feel bad for even having existed. They've been accused of being too sensitive to deflect the abuse that's coming their way. They've been manipulated and controlled and treated like a child. They've been constantly corrected and chastised for their behavior. They've been not allowed to make decisions, needing permission to do anything. If they just want to get the car and go to town, they got to ask permission. They've been totally controlled within their finances and how they spend their money. They've been belittled, trivialized, and all their achievements, their hopes, their dreams have been crushed because they're not worth it. They've been treated as if they were wrong about everything that ever came out of their mouth. You ever know anybody like that? Ever seen any of that? So in our Job training, you need to recognize one of the reasons that good people suffer is that good people suffer from insults that people do to them. And finally, good people suffer from ignorance. It says in Job 40, verse 4 and 5, it says, behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I'll lay my hand over my mouth. Even what I said, I didn't know what I was talking about. That's what Job said. Even though I didn't say anything wrong about you, God, even what I said, I didn't know what I was saying. Wow. He goes on to say, I will proceed no further. I won't say any more. I'm done. Stop the recorder. I'm done. In verse 6 it says, therefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. I'm done. But I want to take you to another verse. If you've got your Job open, look over to Job chapter 9 and verse 24. The earth is given in the hand of the wicked. He covers the faces of its judges. If it is not he, who else could it be? Job learned something. One of the things Job learned was there was a Satan. See, he didn't write chapter 1 and chapter 2 until he finished the book, until he lived it. And he didn't know who else would have done this to him. You never mention Satan in any of the discussions, but he gets it at the end, doesn't he? He knows that there's a war behind the scenes, and somebody else is causing him trouble. Now, the world is filled with stories of ignorance and its many harms that ignorance have caused. There's the lack of knowledge from poor education and how that's caused a lot of life failures and financial poverty. Thomas Edison, back in 1854, when his family moved to Michigan, he attended public school for 12 weeks, and then his teacher complained because he had some attention deficit, disorder, squirrel. So he had to go. His mom ended up teaching him at home, and I'd say he's pretty smart. Electric light bulb, phonograph, and 1,000 other patents. A rich man. Edison said 5% of the people think. 10% of the people think they think, and the other 85% would rather die than think. I think a lot of us might actually suffer from bad teaching from time to time. But what would we do without the teaching that we did have? The lack of knowledge of other races and religions and sexes have caused much hate in our world. It's just ignorance. It's all it is. Noam Chomsky said it's called intentional ignorance, and it fuels American racism. Choosing not to know what happened in the past. Choosing not to get to know each other. It's a choice. Racism exists in America today because we've chosen to either ignore the past or ignore the person sitting next to us. That's it. It's just intentional ignorance. And then there's a lack of knowledge of Jesus and the Bible that's caused lost souls. Hosea 4 verse 6 says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge." That's what's at the bottom of it all. So in this Job training, know that good people suffer often because of just ignorance. There will be a lot of people lost because of ignorance. So injustice, illness, insults, ignorance. Have you noticed how we focus on the negative? This whole lesson has been yuck. I'm just like, can I scrub out my mouth, right? This is just negative, negative, negative. What is that? What is it about us that just makes us run to it, gravitate to it? Why do you watch the news? What good is in it? You need to know? Really? What good is in politics? Can I tell you something? I really hope for a day that you don't express your political views here. We're not there yet, because I find that people dropping in their political views into their prayers and their devotions at this pulpit, and it's no place for it. And it's negative. It's never positive, it's negative. Our religious discussions end up turning negative most of the time. What is that? It's like we're buzzards looking for something bad. And the book of Job, you read the book of Job, do you see anything positive? Can I give you 7 wonderful gospel truths, good news truths from the book of Job? Can I do that before we leave? Can I just throw them up there? You can take a look at them. Let me run through them. Have you seen the good news that's in the book of Job? One is God is the all-wise, omniscient creator. He doesn't explain it because he's all-wise. You can't get it. It would boggle your mind. You barely got through math in the 9th grade. Faith will remain faithful no matter what. Now, I know that'll blow some of your mind because you're just convinced, that sounds like predestination. But let me tell you something. God wouldn't put you through it if He didn't know you could do it. Are you hearing me? The faithful will remain faithful. Romans 8:28, all things work together for good. That's the message of Job. Unfaithful don't all suffer more for their sins, else he's not free. If you're wanting the bad people to suffer more, how is that freedom to choose? We must all suffer kind of on the same level, else there's no freedom in it. You're being forced to go to church by the suffering. You have to allow it. And then Satan does not have unlimited power. If that's not good news, I don't know what is good news. He had to ask permission all along the way. Imagine if he had unlimited power, what he'd do. If you think he's done trouble now, what would he do then? And here's good news. Patient endurance pays off in the end. Job got back double. He got back double. You just need to understand He'll give you double for all your trouble. I really believe that. And then tormented will one day be relieved. It'll happen sooner than you think. It's for a while we suffer, and one day God will deliver us. He'll bless us. He'll heal us. And you say, well, what if you don't make it till the end of that? What if you die soon thereafter? Well, then you'll get heaven. It's not going to last forever, even if it lasts a long time on earth scales. And then finally, grief-stricken you may be, but you've not lost anybody. Amen? Your heart may be breaking today, but praise God, God takes the souls. And we get them all back. You say, well, Job didn't get his family back. He got 10 other kids. Oh, no. He got those 10 other kids, and in heaven, he gets the last 10. He got double the number of kids he would have had. He got everything back double. There is nothing he lost. I think we need to see the world differently. Bob and Stan were good buddies, and they love baseball. They love baseball. All they talked about is baseball. They loved baseball so much that Bob and Stan made a pact together. Said, I'll tell you what, if you'll agree to this, Bob, I'll tell you what, I'll make sure that when I die, I'll come back and I'll tell you whether or not there's baseball in heaven. Bob says, I'll do the same thing for you. If I die first, I'm going to somehow get back here and tell you if there's baseball in heaven. Great. Well, by and by, Bob died. And Stan never heard anything. Finally, one day, Bob showed up and appeared before Stan and says, I got good news and I got bad news. He says, what's the good news? He says, there's baseball in heaven. There's baseball in heaven. He starts listing off all the greats that's been in the past. Mickey Mantle's there and Babe Ruth's there, which is questionable. But I mean, and you start listing off, and they're all there, and all the greats you've known. And baseball is wonderful. You're going to love baseball in heaven. He says, that's great. He says, what's the bad news? He said, well, you're pitching tomorrow night. That's not bad news. If you knew you were going to heaven and you'd be having fun tomorrow night, how's that bad news? It's all in how you look at it. Don't look at Job as negative. You can flip every trouble you have around if you can see it from the right angle. Tough as that may be, it is true. If you're here today and you've not given your life to the Lord Jesus, that's the first step to make sure you get to be at that baseball game in heaven. Won't you come if you need to while we stand and while we sing?